And with that, the 23-24 season comes to an end. You might be hearing it in my voice. I was screaming my head off. The past 20 minutes or so have been filled with some of the most incredible hockey watching experience I've ever had. This was the first time in a long time that I personally was paying attention to two games, two different screens, equally just invested into both of them. But the finality of the 23-24 season has set itself in. The Detroit Red Wings are not making the playoffs, and the Washington Capitals have locked that final wildcard spot. Sorry, Philadelphia, sorry, Pittsburgh, sorry, Detroit, but the Caps are going to the playoffs with their negative 30-something goal differential. Okay, we'll save that for another day, but as we have been talking about in yesterday's show and in the video this morning, the Capitals needed to lose to the Philadelphia Flyers. The Flyers had their own playoff stakes on the line. They needed to beat the Capitals in regulation in order for Philly to have themselves a fighting chance. However, the Red Wings just needed the Capitals to lose in any fashion. Even if it was in overtime, the Caps, if they lost, the Wings would have themselves the opportunity to take over that spot. Unfortunately, with 3 minutes to go in the Caps and Flyers game, tied up 1-1, the Flyers, in a desperate bid to win the game in regulation, pulled the goaltender even though it was tied, and Washington ended up scoring. Final score, 2-1, regulation victory. The game-winning goal was the empty netter. And with that, the Detroit Red Wings season, the Detroit Red Wings win over Montreal. 5-4 shootout win, thanks Patrick Kane. With that, the Wings' victory is pretty much just for the bragging rights. This win, had it actually meant something, would have been the craziest way for Detroit to clinch up a final spot. Even if you assume, let's say the Philadelphia Flyers somehow tie it up against Washington and then they win in a shootout or something. That would have secured the Wings into the postseason if the Caps just lost. But nah. The Flyers had their own agenda. They couldn't let that game go to extra time, so they put it all on the line, and in a way, they screwed over the Red Wings at the same time. So, thank you, Philadelphia, but for Detroit, you could do all the kicking and screaming as you want, but realistically, this season, the ebbs and flows and everything in between, the Wings had themselves a fairly good chance at making the playoffs. I'm not going to say that everything boiled over in the final game or two games or it's Philadelphia's fault or whatever. It's everybody's fault. The Wings had multiple games throughout this season where they blew the lead or they really just let go of a few extra points that they could have had. You can't say they were a perfect team after all. But for a team that was in this position anyway, to be slowly building themselves up back towards playoff contention, this is ultimately what you wanted, right? If you had told Wings fans at the beginning of the season, hey, on game 82, the Wings will be playing in a super important game where if they win, they can make the playoffs, where if they lose, they're out. They could win and still not make it, depending on what happens, but being in that position, to be able to force your hand on the last week of the regular season, is that not what Wings fans would call progress? And it comes in the form of this game, another 5-4 extra time victory over the Montreal Canadiens, who had themselves a lot of stories of their own. Lane Hutson, as we had talked about in yesterday's game, he had his first home point, so there you go. What a beautiful shimmy-shammy to out-duel Perron on the Canadiens' blue line before sending it on goal and having Juraj Slafkovsky tip it. And for the Red Wings, you had that same David Perron tie the game up with 3 seconds to go in the third period to send the game to overtime. This, of course, didn't ultimately mean anything, but for those few minutes when the Wings and the Canadiens were leaving the ice, getting set to play for the extra 3-on-3 5-minute frame, there was a few minutes or so of just intense anxiety because at that point, the Flyers and the Capitals game did not end yet. There was still a chance for the Flyers to either tie the game and win in overtime, or to maybe pull off their own desired outcome of 2 regulation goals in the last minute or so, but ultimately they can't get it done. The Capitals win, they're locked into the postseason, it's going to be Ovechkin versus Panarin, and the Red Wings are going home. In fact, even during the shootout, you saw just the body language. The Red Wings, after they won, after Patrick Kane sealed the deal and put a bow on top by just firing a puck by Cayden Primeau to end off this crazy marathon of a hockey game. After that was over, You saw everybody hugging, you saw the body language, you saw their facial expressions. They looked kind of defeated. But at the end of the day, you know, hockey is an 82-game-long seasoned sport. These guys worked their behinds off for a good chunk of that. I want to say a good chunk and not all of it, because there were certainly some moments where the Wings did not look their best. But to come away out of this season with that close of an opportunity to making the playoffs, had you just won one more extra game, had you just not choked one more third period previously, had you just won one or two more overtime games, the Wings would have made it. It was that close. And can you really get ticked off about that? Oh, Lego, come on, talk about the game, talk about the game. Okay, fine, we'll talk about the game. I'm honestly, pretty indifferent to the game at this point, because it's yeah, people didn't really watch this because of the game. People watched this because of the playoff implications. But if you needed to get the scoop, I know we do have some Canadiens fans who are tuning into this video as well. Hey, guess what? Logan Mailloux got himself his first NHL point. Very nice breakout pass to spring Brendan Gallagher, who found Alex Newhook, who came right in and fired it by James Reimer. That was the 1-0 goal. Moritz Seider got a goal assisted by Dylan Larkin and Lucas Reimer to tie it up at 1-1. That was at the end of the first period, an absolute bomb of a slap shot that gets by Primeau. The Canadiens, though, had themselves a pretty good bounce back in the second period as Gallagher and Caufield each found themselves the back of the net off of some really good rebound plays. This was James Reimer kind of getting caught a little bit too far out. At the same time, the defensive coverage, you could say, was lacking on these opportunities. Gallagher's especially, it was like a 2-on-1 rush. And then for Cole Caufield, it was yet another rebound out in front. But with the score up 3-1 for Montreal, you saw Joe Veleno bring the game within one with a pretty weird goal. The puck gets rebounded off of Cayden Primeau, and Primeau doesn't cover it. He's looking at the referees the whole time, and then Veleno just comes right in, fires it by. It's a very odd goal, very odd play, but hey, if you're the Wings, you take anything the way you can get him, right? And that continued into the third period when Daniel Sprong got himself his 18th of the year as he squeaked down behind the Canadiens' goal line and fired it on goal from the corner, bouncing the puck in off of, it looked like Cayden Primeau's pad, and into the back of the net. So 3-3 game at this point. Juraj Slafkovsky, 10 minutes later, then gets himself a beautiful goal assisted by Lane Hutson. This is exactly what we were talking about. Lane Hutson is at the point, he shimmy-shammies, goes back and forth, and he confuses the heck out of David Perron before firing the puck to the goal, and it gets tipped in front by Slafkovsky. Beautiful assist by Lane Hutson. The crowd was absolutely electric every time he had touched the ice. And then, as the Red Wings were finishing off this third period, they were down by 1. The play gets stopped for icing. 7 seconds to go, and the Wings have an offensive draw. It's Larkin who goes down on the ice. He plays it back to the D-man. Gostisbehere over to Perron, who one-times it at the top of the point, and he scores an extraordinarily long-range, final second buzzer-beating 4-4 game-tying goal. And the Wings are going to overtime. This was crazy. Craziest goal all year. 100%. David Perron has been a warrior through and through. Sure, you could talk about the inefficiencies, you could talk about the inconsistencies, you could talk about whether or not his game is really needed, but man, was that one of the most clutch Red Wings goals we have seen in a decade. Seriously. It didn't matter in the end. The Wings ultimately won in the shootout after killing off a penalty in overtime, but as we had said, Washington won, so it doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, though, the Wings and their efforts give the fans something very good to cheer about. There are some great numbers, some great performances from the team. For the Montreal Canadiens, you saw a lot of line shuffling going around. You had guys coming in, guys coming out, Harris, Kovacevic, Struble, Mailloux, lots of guys just rotating, giving a big resume for next year. And ultimately, there was a good showcase, but, the Canadiens were eliminated a while ago. Getting another loss is good for their Macklin-Celebrini sweepstakes. But with the Red Wings eliminated from the 2024 Stanley Cup Playoffs, this is the end of their season. We could talk a little bit more about this and more in the upcoming weeks, but for now, let me know your thoughts in the comments section below about the Washington Capitals making the playoffs, the Wings losing out, and this day being the final countdown for all of those regular season festivities. I hope you enjoyed this video, and bye.